The sun hung lazily in the sky over Pinewood, a picturesque little town that prided itself on its charm. Jamal Carter had lived here his whole life, and he knew the unwritten rules better than most. At 17, he was a black young man with big dreams. Jamal loved the idea of being his own boss, imagining one day running his own business, a space where everyone, no matter who they were, would feel welcome. His late grandfather had been an entrepreneur, and Jamal often dreamed of following in his footsteps. But dreams like Jamal's didn't come easy in Pinewood. Every week, he walked down Main Street to pick up groceries for his mom at Grant's General Store. The store was run by Ms. Grant, an older white woman whose demeanor could sour milk. She ruled her shop with an iron fist, and her sharp tongue was infamous. For as long as Jamal could remember, Ms. Grant had treated him like a problem waiting to happen. Her eyes would narrow as he entered the store, tracking his every move. She always had something snide to say. "You looking for something specific, boy, or just loitering?" Jamal always responded politely. He wasn't about to let Ms. Grant's attitude drag him down. Still, every trip to the store carried a familiar weight. Ms. Grant's words weren't just words. They were a reminder of how the world could sometimes feel stacked against him. But Jamal held on to his dream. Someday, he told himself, he'd prove that kindness and hard work could shine brighter than prejudice. Little did Jamal know, one fateful visit to Ms. Grant's store was about to change everything. The bell above the door jingled as Jamal stepped into Grant's General Store. His list was tucked neatly into his pocket, and he promised his mom he'd be quick. The familiar smell of cedar wood, mixed with faint lemon cleaner, greeted him as he walked through the aisles. Ms. Usway, Grant was behind the counter, her dark blue eyes immediately locking on to him. "Back again, huh?" she said, her tone biting. "What is it this time, Carter?" Jamal forced a polite smile. "Just picking up a few things for my mom, ma'am." Ms. Grant didn't respond, but her gaze followed him as he moved through the aisles. Jamal could feel her presence like a shadow. It was nothing new, but today it seemed worse. He reached for a can of soup when she suddenly appeared behind him, startling him. "You sure you're not just snooping around?" she asked loudly, her voice dripping with accusation. Jamal straightened, his heart sinking. "No, ma'am, just following my list." Ms. Grant squinted at him as if trying to catch him in a lie. As Jamal moved to the counter with his groceries, a tin of mints fell from the edge of the cart and rolled to the floor. Before he could pick it up, Ms. Grant pounced. "Caught red-handed," she exclaimed, her voice ringing through the store. A few customers turned to watch. "Thought you'd just help yourself, huh?" "I knew it." Jamal froze, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. "It wasn't like that, Ms. Grant. It just fell—" "Save it," she snapped, pointing toward the door. "I've had enough of your kind thinking you can get away with whatever you want. Get out of my store and don't come back." Jamal swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. He quietly left the groceries behind, his dignity bruised but intact. As he walked out, whispers and stares followed him. Outside, he paused to catch his breath, the humiliation settling like a heavy weight on his chest. Jamal had no idea that this moment was only the beginning of a story much bigger than himself. By the next morning, the incident at Grant's General Store had spread through Pinewood like wildfire. In a town as small as this, gossip traveled faster than the wind. At the local diner, patrons leaned over their coffee mugs, whispering heatedly about what had happened. At the barber shop, the debate raged even louder. "She's been running that store for over 30 years, one man declared, slapping the armrest of his chair. "Ms. Grant's a pillar of this community. If she says the boy was up to something, I believe her." Across town at the cinema, the atmosphere was different. Jamal's friends and neighbors, particularly the black community, were appalled. "That boy has done nothing but show respect," Mrs. Carter, Jamal's mother, fumed to her sister on the phone. "He doesn't have a dishonest bone in his body." Jamal stayed quiet through most of the commotion. Though the sting of humiliation was fresh, he busied himself with helping around the house. But his mother knew her son too well to let it go unnoticed. "Baby, you can't let her words define you," she said gently, as she placed a hand on his shoulder. Jamal nodded, but his silence spoke volumes. Meanwhile, at the edge of town, a mysterious older man sat on the porch of a small inn, sipping coffee and flipping through the local newspaper. He'd been in Pinewood for a while, blending in with the town's slow pace. As Clint Eastwood read about the incident, his furrowed brow deepened. This wasn't just a petty small-town spat. This was a moment that could define someone's future. Clint had seen it all before. Later that afternoon, Clint walked down Main Street, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his weathered face. As he passed the store, he noticed Ms. Grant inside, her lips pursed with a self-satisfied air. Across the street, Jamal sat on the curb, his chin resting on his hands. Clint stopped, observing the boy quietly. He'd seen enough. This was his moment to step in. That evening, there was a knock at the Carters' front door. Mrs. Carter opened it cautiously, only to find Clint Eastwood standing on the porch, his cowboy hat in hand and a gentle but serious look on his face. "Good evening, ma'am," Clint greeted her, his voice calm but commanding. "My name's Clint Eastwood. I was hoping to have a word with Jamal." Mrs. Carter blinked, surprised but sensing no ill intent. "Come on in, Mr. Eastwood," she said, stepping aside. "Jamal's in the living room." Jamal looked up from the couch as Clint entered. His first thought was confusion, his second, curiosity. "Clint Eastwood?" Jamal asked, standing up awkwardly. Clint nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's right. I've been in town a while, researching the history of local businesses for a project. Heard about what happened to you." Jamal shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Clint took a seat across from him, leaning forward slightly. "I'm here because I've seen too many good people let moments like this define them. I want you to know it doesn't have to be that way." Clint shared a story from his own youth about standing up to discrimination during his early years in Hollywood. "I was just a kid, but I learned fast that the world's got a way of testing you," he said. "The important thing isn't how they treat you, it's how you respond. Grace and determination, son. Those are your sharpest tools." Jamal listened intently, his chest tightening as Clint's words sank in. Clint leaned back, studying him. "You're smart, Jamal, and from what I hear, you've got big dreams. Don't let this town, or anyone in it, make you feel small. You've got more power than you realize." Before leaving, Clint placed a firm hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Remember, kid, it's not just about what happens to you. It's about what you do next." With that, Clint tipped his hat to Mrs. Carter and disappeared into the evening, leaving behind a spark of hope that had been missing since the incident. 2 days after Clint's visit, Jamal stood in his living room, arms crossed, as Clint pitched his idea to the Carters. "We need to bring people together, get the town talking," Clint said. "The community center is the perfect place to start." Mrs. Carter looked skeptical. "And what exactly will this meeting accomplish, Mr. Eastwood? Folks around here don't like to admit when they're wrong." Clint nodded thoughtfully. "I get that, but sometimes you plant a seed. It might take time to grow, but it'll take root. This town needs that seed, and Jamal here can help plant it." Jamal glanced nervously at his mother. "Me? I don't know, Mr. Eastwood. I'm just a kid. Who's going to listen to me?" Clint's gaze was steady, almost challenging. "They'll listen because you've got the truth on your side, and I'll be standing right there with you." After a long silence, Jamal finally exhaled and nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Clint, true to his word, became both mentor and coach to Jamal. They spent hours at the kitchen table, discussing everything from public speaking to handling tough questions. Clint shared stories of his own struggles, emphasizing the importance of composure and confidence. "You can't let anger be your guide, kid," Clint said one evening as they walked down the dirt path leading to the center of town. "Speak from your heart, but with your head. People respect strength, not just volume." As the meeting day approached, word spread across Pinewood. Flyers were handed out at the diner and barbershop. Clint even convinced the local pastor to announce the gathering after Sunday service. The small town buzzed with curiosity and skepticism. On the evening of the meeting, the community center slowly filled with familiar faces, some supportive, others wary. Jamal stood backstage, his palms sweaty, while Clint gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "You've got this, Jamal," Clint said firmly. "Remember, this isn't about changing everyone overnight. It's about taking the first step." The room was quiet as Clint stepped up to the microphone, his commanding presence silencing the soft murmurs. "Good evening," he began, his voice always calm but steady. "I asked you all to come here tonight because this town is at a crossroads. What we do next will define us. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, lingering briefly on Ms. Grant, who sat near the back, her arms folded tightly. Every small town has its stories, some good, some not so good, but too often those stories include folks being treated as less than because of who they are. And let me tell you, that's not the kind of story any town should be proud of. One by one, attendees began sharing their own experiences. A middle-aged black man recounted how his grandfather had been denied a loan to expand his farm. A Latina woman spoke about being followed around stores, including Ms. Grant's, as though she were a criminal. Each story was a window into the town's troubled past, painting a picture of systemic bias that couldn't be ignored. Clint listened intently, occasionally nodding, his expression one of quiet understanding. Finally, it was Jamal's turn. As he stepped up to the microphone, the crowd seemed to lean forward. He gripped the edges of the podium tightly, drawing strength from Clint's encouraging nod. "I've lived in this town my whole life," Jamal began, his voice wavering slightly. "I've always believed in treating people with respect, no matter who they are. But last week I walked into a store I've been going to since I was a kid, and I was treated like I didn't belong." He paused, scanning the room. "I have dreams, big dreams. I want to start my own business someday, maybe even right here in Pinewood. But how can I dream when people like Miss Grant look at me and see only the color of my skin?" For a moment, the room was silent, save for the faint creak of folding chairs. Even Ms. Grant, her face still stony, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Jamal's voice grew stronger. "This isn't just about me. It's about what kind of town we want to be. Do we keep letting hate and fear define us, or do we start building something better?" When Jamal finished, the room erupted into applause, tentative at first, then thunderous. Clint stepped forward, clapping Jamal on the shoulder, a small but proud smile on his face. From her seat in the back, Ms. Grant sat motionless, her lips pursed. Though her expression remained unreadable, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, whether it was discomfort, reflection, or the first spark of change, only time would tell. The bell above the door jingled as Clint Eastwood stepped into Ms. Grant's store. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rows of dusty shelves. Ms. Grant, standing behind the counter with her ever-present scowl, glanced up and immediately stiffened. "Well, Mr. Eastwood," she said curtly, "what can I do for you? Or have you come to tell me how to run my store, like everyone else?" Clint removed his hat, his piercing gaze steady as he walked up to the counter. "I'm not here to tell you how to run your store, Ms. Grant," he said in his calm, gravelly tone. "I'm here to talk about how you treat people." Ms. Grant raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "I treat people the way they deserve to be treated. If that boy hadn't been acting suspicious, none of this would have happened." Clint nodded slowly, leaning on the counter. "You think Jamal deserved to be humiliated, to be treated like a criminal because of the way he looks?" His voice was low but firm, each word landing like a stone. Ms. Grant bristled. "I don't have time for lectures. I'm just trying to protect my business. People steal, Mr. Eastwood. I've seen it before." "And has Jamal ever stolen from you?" Clint countered, his gaze unwavering. "Or is that just what you assumed?" Ms. Grant faltered, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find a response. Clint continued, his voice softening. "I get it, Ms. Grant. You've run this store for years. You've worked hard, and you've seen the town change in ways that make you uncomfortable. But let me tell you something. Pushing people away because of fear or prejudice doesn't protect your business, it destroys it." For the first time, Ms. Grant looked unsure. Clint pressed on. "This town is moving forward whether you like it or not. You can either be a part of that progress or be left behind." Ms. Grant's lips tightened, but the flicker of doubt in her eyes betrayed her resolve. Clint nodded, placing his hat back on. "Think about it, Ms. Grant. The choice is yours." As Clint walked out, Ms. Grant stood motionless, staring at the counter. For the first time in years, the silence of the store felt heavy. At the Carter household, Jamal sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open and a notebook filled with sketches and ideas beside him. Clint leaned over his shoulder, pointing to the screen. "You've got something special here, kid. People love handmade, unique items. You just need to get the word out." Encouraged by Clint's mentorship and his family's support, Jamal launched his small online business, selling handcrafted keychains, wallets, and other leather goods he had been making as a hobby. He called it J. Carter Creations. Word spread quickly around town. Jamal's friends shared his website on social media, and his mother handed out flyers at the diner. Soon, orders began pouring in, not just from Pinewood, but from neighboring towns as well. Each sale felt like a small victory, a reminder of what he could achieve with determination and support. Meanwhile, over at Ms. Grant's store, the atmosphere had grown noticeably quieter. Foot traffic was dwindling as more townspeople shifted their support to Jamal's business and other local shops. Ms. Grant stood behind the counter, watching through the window as a young couple walked past her store, carrying one of Jamal's signature paper bags. It wasn't just about the products. Jamal's success had become a symbol of hope for the town, a beacon of what could happen when the community rallied behind someone with dreams and resilience. Even residents who had initially sided with Miss Grant were now ordering from Jamal, their attitudes softening as they saw his potential. At the community center, Jamal hosted his first pop-up event, showcasing his products in person. The turnout was overwhelming, with dozens of residents stopping by to offer their support. Clint stood off to the side, watching with a satisfied smile as Jamal shook hands, accepted compliments, and proudly explained his work. As Jamal packed up at the end of the event, he glanced at Clint, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me, Mr. Eastwood." Clint tipped his hat. "You did the hard part, kid. And trust me, this is just the beginning." Back at her store, Ms. Grant stared at the empty aisles, her expression conflicted. For the first time, she began to wonder if her actions and her resistance to change had cost her more than just customers. The sight of Jamal's pop-up event, crowded with happy customers, had hit her harder than she expected. The days in Ms. Grant's store had grown eerily quiet. She spent her time rearranging shelves, though the lack of customers made the effort seem pointless. Her usual brisk demeanor softened into something more contemplative, especially as she caught glimpses of the town rallying around Jamal's growing success. The sight of his pop-up event, being crowded with happy customers, had hit her harder than she expected. One evening, as she sat alone in her small office at the back of the store, she stared at an old photograph on her desk, a picture of her late father, who had started the store decades ago. This store was built on hard work and fairness, he had always said, but somewhere along the way she realized she had let fear and prejudice cloud those values. The next morning, Ms. Grant stood outside Jamal's house, nervously clutching her purse. When Jamal opened the door, his surprise was evident. "Ms. Grant?" he asked cautiously, his voice measured. She straightened her posture, but her eyes betrayed a vulnerability. "Jamal, I came to apologize," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was wrong about everything. The way I treated you, the assumptions I made. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right." Jamal crossed his arms, his face a mix of surprise and weariness. Before he could respond, Ms. Grant continued, "I see now how much you've done for this town, for yourself. I admire that, and I'd like to make amends if you'll let me." "What do you mean?" Jamal asked, his voice steady but curious. "I want to stock your products in my store," Ms. Grant said. "Your business is growing, and I'd be honored to showcase your work. It's the least I can do." Jamal hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. Clint's voice echoed in his mind. "Sometimes the best way to build bridges is to meet people halfway." Finally, he nodded. "All right, Ms. Grant, but this isn't just business. It's about doing better." Ms. Grant nodded, relief washing over her face. "I'll do better, Jamal. I promise." With a handshake, they took the first step toward reconciliation, a moment that symbolized the beginning of a long overdue change. A gentle breeze swept through the town square as colorful banners fluttered in the air. The community event celebrating Jamal's business success had drawn a lively crowd. Families milled about, enjoying food, music, and the stalls showcasing local artisans. With Jamal's booth front and center, Jamal stood by his table, greeting customers and friends with a confident smile. His family beamed with pride nearby, while Clint Eastwood lingered in the background, his signature calm presence grounding the scene. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Clint stepped onto the small stage set up in the center of the square. The murmurs of the crowd quieted as he began to speak. "This town has seen its fair share of struggles," he said, his gravelly voice carrying weight. "But tonight I see something different. I see growth, I see understanding, and I see hope." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "It's not easy to confront our flaws individually or as a community, but it's necessary." Jamal's story reminds us that resilience and grace can break barriers and that we all have a role to play in building something better. The crowd erupted into applause, but Clint wasn't done. He gestured toward Ms. Grant, who stood hesitantly at the edge of the gathering. "Change isn't easy, but it's never too late to start. I commend those who've taken steps to grow, even when it's hard." Ms. Grant stepped forward, visibly nervous but determined. "I want to thank Jamal for giving me a chance to do better," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And to everyone here, I'll work to be the kind of neighbor this town deserves." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, a sign that the town was ready to embrace a brighter future. As the celebration continued, Clint quietly slipped away, tipping his hat to Jamal as he passed. "You've got this, kid," he said with a nod. Jamal watched him go, a mix of gratitude and determination in his heart. The town, now united in a way it had never been before, buzzed with the energy of possibility. Together, they were ready to write a new chapter, one of inclusion, kindness, and understanding. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over Pinewood, the community event was in full swing. Children laughed as they played, local bands performed lively tunes, and tables were lined with handcrafted goods from Jamal's thriving business, J. Carter Creations. Among the crowd stood Ms. Grant, mingling with townspeople, her once sharp demeanor softened into a cautious smile. Clint Eastwood leaned against a tree near the edge of the park, observing the scene with a satisfied air. Jamal approached him, carrying 2 cups of lemonade. "You were right, Mr. Eastwood. This is just the beginning," Jamal said, handing him a cup. Clint took a sip and nodded. "You've earned it, kid. Remember, change doesn't happen overnight, but every step counts." As the night wound down, Jamal stepped onto a small stage at the center of the park. The crowd grew quiet as he picked up the microphone, his face glowing with gratitude. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Jamal began. "This isn't just about me or my business. It's about this community, about us choosing to see each other for who we are, not for who we've been taught to fear or mistrust. Pinewood is changing, and I'm proud to be a part of that change." He paused and scanning the crowd. "If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting. Whether it's standing up for yourself or finding the courage to forgive, the way forward is always through kindness and resilience." The audience erupted in applause, and as Jamal stepped down, he was met with handshakes, hugs, and words of encouragement. Even Ms. Grant approached, her eyes glistening with sincerity. "You're a remarkable young man, Jamal. Thank you for giving me a second chance," she said. As the crowd began to disperse, Jamal turned to the camera set up by his friends to record the event. With a bright smile, he addressed the viewers, who would later watch it online. "To everyone watching, thank you for your support. It's people like you who help make dreams like mine possible. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear your experiences with community, resilience, and growth. Remember, every small act of kindness can lead to big changes. Together, we can build a brighter future for everyone." As the video ended and the last of the attendees drifted home, the lights of Pinewood shone brightly against the night sky, a testament to the power of unity and hope.